The woman who came to disappear. When Clara Reed steps off the stagecoach at a remote Wyoming ranch, she's running from accusations that could destroy her. Hired as a cook by widowed rancher Ethan Cole, she plans to disappear into silence and hard work. But his young daughter sees past the rumors to the truth, and in a place where judgment runs deep and second chances are rare, Clara must choose between the safety of running and the terrifying risk of staying. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and settle in. This one's about courage, belonging, and the family we choose when the world tells us we don't deserve one. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust and dying light, and Clara Reed stepped down into a silence so vast it felt like judgment. She steadied herself against the worn wooden rail, her traveling dress heavy with trail dust, her single bag clutched tight in both hands. Around her, the Wyoming frontier stretched in every direction, endless sky, wind-scraped hills, and a loneliness so absolute it could swallow a woman whole, which was exactly what Clara wanted, to disappear. The driver nodded once, his weathered face revealing nothing, and clicked his tongue. The horses lurched forward, wheels creaking, and within moments the stagecoach was a fading shape against the amber horizon. Clara watched until it vanished completely, then turned to face the ranch. It sat low against the land, rough-hewn and functional, the kind of place built by necessity rather than ambition. A single-story house with a sagging porch, a barn that leaned slightly eastward, as if the wind had been pushing at it for years. Corrals empty of livestock, everything painted in shades of gray and brown, colors that spoke of work and weariness, and nothing wasted on beauty. Clara had seen prettier places. She'd also seen worse. What mattered was that it was far from everything she was running from. She crossed the yard slowly, her boots sinking into dirt that hadn't seen rain in weeks. The wind pulled at her bonnet, tugged strands of dark hair loose from their pins. She didn't bother fixing them. Vanity had no place here, and she'd learned long ago that looking too careful only made people ask questions. The front door opened before she reached the porch. A man stepped out, tall and lean, his face shadowed by the brim of a dusty hat. He stood with the stillness of someone who'd learned to read a situation before committing to it, his hands loose at his sides, his gaze direct but not unkind. "Miss Reed?" His voice was low, rough-edged, the kind that came from years of speaking only when necessary. "Yes." Clara stopped at the bottom of the steps, squinting up at him. "Mr. Cole?" He nodded once. "Ethan." He gestured toward the door. "Come in. You'll want water. Maybe food." "Thank you." She climbed the steps, aware of his eyes on her, but not in the way she'd grown accustomed to. Not assessing, not suspicious, just watchful. The way a man might watch a stranger entering his home when trust was something earned, not given. Inside, the house was dim and spare. A single main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a narrow hallway leading deeper into shadow. The furniture was simple: table, chairs, a single rocker near the hearth. Everything clean but worn, functional but joyless. Clara set her bag down near the door and removed her bonnet, smoothing her hair with shaking fingers. She was tired. Bone-tired. Soul-tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from running and never knowing if you'd run far enough. "Sit." Ethan gestured toward the table, then moved to the stove. He worked quietly, efficiently, pouring water from a kettle into a tin cup, setting it before her with a plate of bread and cold meat. "It's not much." "It's more than enough." Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "Thank you." He pulled out a chair across from her, but didn't sit, just leaned against the back of it, studying her with eyes that were neither warm nor cold. Measuring. "You came a long way," he said. "I did." "Letter said you had experience cooking for ranch hands, large groups." Clara nodded, sipping the water slowly. "I worked at a boarding house in Kansas. Before that, a hotel in Missouri. I can manage a kitchen, Mr. Cole. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Ethan," he corrected, His gaze didn't waver. "And I'm not worried about the work. I'm worried about whether you'll stay." The words landed like stones. Clara met his eyes, saw the weariness there, the caution. This was a man who'd been disappointed before, who'd learned not to count on anything that might leave. "I'll stay as long as you need me," she said quietly. "I'm not looking for anything else." It wasn't a lie. She wasn't looking for anything at all, except the kind of silence that came from being forgotten. Ethan studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "All right." He straightened, shoving his hands into his pockets. "You'll have a room off the kitchen. Small, but it's yours. I'll show you." Clara stood, picking up her bag, and followed him through the narrow hallway. He pushed open a door to reveal a tiny room with a single bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the hills. The quilt was faded but clean. The floor swept, spare, like everything else. "It's perfect," Clara said, and meant it. Ethan lingered in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I should tell you, I have a daughter, Molly. She's 6, shy around strangers." Clara's chest tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I understand. She lost her mother 2 years ago." The words came slowly, carefully, as if speaking them still cost him something. "She doesn't talk much, doesn't attach easy. I'll be respectful of that." He nodded, seeming to accept this, then stepped back. "I'll let you settle. Breakfast is early. 5. I'll be ready." He turned to leave, then paused, glancing back. "One more thing." Clara waited. "People around here talk," Ethan said quietly, "about anyone new, about women traveling alone." His gaze was steady, but there was something almost protective in it. "I don't put much stock in gossip, but if there's anything you need to tell me, anything that might follow you here, I'd rather hear it now." Clara's throat went dry. For a moment she considered it, considered telling him the truth about the accusations, the trial that never was, the way an entire town had turned on her based on lies and fear. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. Because the truth didn't matter if people had already decided what to believe. "There's nothing," she said instead, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need a quiet place to work." Ethan searched her face, and she wondered what he saw. Desperation? Exhaustion? The hollow space where hope used to be? Finally, he nodded. "All right then. Welcome to the ranch, Miss Reed." He left, pulling the door closed behind him, and Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling in her lap. She'd made it. Another town, another job, another chance to be invisible. But as she sat there in the fading light, listening to the wind press against the window and the silence settle around her like a shroud, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this place was different, too quiet, too wounded, and far too fragile for someone who never planned to stay. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn. Old habits, the kind that came from years of living in boarding houses and cheap hotels, where sleeping late meant going hungry and missed work meant losing your place. She dressed quickly in the dark, a simple gray work dress, her hair pinned tight beneath a plain kerchief, and slipped out of her room into the kitchen. The house was still. No sound but the creak of floorboards beneath her feet and the distant rustle of wind outside. She found matches near the stove, lit the fire, and set about making coffee. The motions were automatic, comforting in their familiarity. Measure the grounds, fill the pot, wait for the water to boil. She was slicing bread when she heard the footsteps. Not Ethan's heavy tread, but something lighter. Hesitant. Clara turned slowly, and there in the doorway stood a small girl, barefoot and wide-eyed, clutching a rag doll against her chest. Molly. She was thin, all sharp elbows and too big nightgown, with tangled brown hair and her father's watchful eyes. She didn't speak, just stood there staring, and Clara's heart did something complicated and painful in her chest. "Good morning," Clara said softly, keeping her voice low and gentle. She didn't move closer, didn't reach out, just stayed where she was, hands folded, waiting. The girl blinked but didn't answer. Clara turned back to the bread, giving her space. "I'm making breakfast. Are you hungry?" Silence. Clara didn't push. She'd learned in her years of hard experience that silence wasn't always refusal. Sometimes it was fear. Sometimes it was grief. And sometimes it was just a person deciding whether you were safe. She finished slicing the bread, set it on a plate, and poured coffee into 2 tin cups. Then she turned and found Molly still standing in the doorway, watching her with an intensity that was almost unnerving. "Would you like to help me?" Clara asked quietly. The girl's eyes widened slightly. "I don't know where your father keeps the butter," Clara continued, gesturing toward the shelves. "Or the jam, if there is any." For a long moment, Molly didn't move. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, setting her doll carefully on a chair before crossing to the cupboard. She opened it without a word and pointed to a small crock. "Butter?" Clara asked. Molly nodded. "Thank you." The girl retrieved it, carried it to the table, then pointed to another shelf. "Jam?" Another nod. Clara smiled. Small, careful, nothing that might startle. "You're a good helper." Molly's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not quite trust. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of curiosity. They worked in silence after that, Molly fetching things when Clara asked, Clara moving slowly and deliberately, never crowding, never demanding conversation. By the time Ethan appeared in the doorway, boots on and hat in hand, the table was set and the smell of fresh coffee filled the room. He stopped short, his gaze moving from Clara to Molly and back again. "Morning?" Clara said simply. "Morning." His voice was rough with sleep, but there was something else in it too. Surprise, maybe, or caution. Molly ran to him, wrapping her arms around his leg, and he bent down, brushing a hand over her tangled hair. "You helping Miss Reed?" The girl nodded against his knee. Ethan's eyes lifted to Clara's, and she saw the question there, the wariness. People didn't usually reach his daughter, didn't usually get past the wall of silence she'd built around herself. "She's been very helpful," Clara said quietly. Ethan studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Good." They sat down to breakfast, bread and butter, coffee, a handful of early apples from a neighbor's tree, and ate without much conversation. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence, just the quiet of people who didn't waste words when there was nothing that needed saying. When the meal was finished, Ethan stood, settling his hat on his head. "I'll be working the fence line today, north pasture." Clara nodded. "I'll have supper ready when you're back." He hesitated, glancing at Molly, who was arranging her doll at the table as if setting a place for it. "She'll probably stay close to the house. She doesn't wander far." "I'll keep an eye on her." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, and Clara wondered if she'd overstepped. But then he nodded. "Appreciate it." He left through the back door, and Clara watched through the window as he crossed the yard toward the barn, his shoulders set against the wind, his stride long and purposeful. A man carrying weight he'd never set down. She turned back to the table and found Molly watching her, those dark eyes steady and searching. "What would you like to do today?" Clara asked gently. Molly pointed toward the kitchen. "You want to stay here? With me?" A nod. Clara's chest ached, but she kept her expression calm. "All right, let's clean up then. And maybe later, if you'd like, you can help me make bread." The girl's face didn't change, but she slid off her chair and began collecting the plates, carrying them carefully to the wash basin. Clara worked beside her, their movements quiet and synchronized, and something strange began to settle in the space between them. Not trust. Not yet. But the beginning of something that might, if given time, grow into it. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Clara rose before dawn, lit the stove, made coffee. Molly appeared like clockwork, silent and watchful, helping without being asked. Ethan worked the land from sunup to sundown, returning each evening dusty and exhausted, speaking little but eating everything Clara set before him. It was a quiet life, a small life. And for Clara, who had spent so long running, it was the closest thing to peace she'd known in years. But peace, she'd learned, was fragile. On the 5th morning, Clara walked into town. Ethan had given her a list: flour, sugar, salt, a few other necessities, and directions to the general store. It was a 3-mile walk, but the weather was clear and Clara didn't mind. Solitude suited her, always had. The town, when she reached it, was exactly what she'd expected. A single dusty street lined with weathered buildings. A saloon, a church, a handful of shops. People moved slowly, spoke quietly, Watched strangers with the kind of suspicion that came from living in a place where everyone knew everyone and outsiders were noted. Clara kept her head down and made her way to the general store. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the woman behind the counter looked up, middle-aged, sharp-eyed, her mouth already pursing in assessment. "Help you?" "I have a list." Clara pulled the paper from her pocket and handed it over. The woman scanned it, her expression unreadable, then glanced at Clara. "You're new." "Yes." "Working for Ethan Cole?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I'm his cook." The woman set the list aside and began pulling items from the shelves, her movements brisk and efficient. "He mentioned he was hiring." "It was arranged by letter." "That's so." The woman's tone was flat, neither friendly nor hostile, but Clara could feel the weight of judgment settling around her like dust. "Where are you from?" "East," Clara said vaguely. "East is a big place." Clara didn't answer, and the woman didn't press, but the silence that followed was pointed, deliberate. By the time Clara left the store, packages bundled in her arms, she could feel eyes on her back. Whispers threading through the street like smoke. New woman, traveling alone, working for the widower. It was starting. It always did. Clara walked quickly, head down, heart pounding, and didn't look back until she was well outside the town limits. Only then did she slow, her breath coming fast and shallow, her hands trembling around the packages. "It's fine," she told herself. "They don't know anything. They're just curious." But Clara had learned, the hard way, that curiosity could turn to suspicion faster than a spark could catch dry grass. And once it started, there was no stopping it. That evening, Ethan noticed. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her as she moved around the kitchen, her hands unsteady, her gaze distant. Molly noticed too, hovering closer than usual, her small face creased with concern. Finally, as Clara set supper on the table, stew and cornbread, simple and filling, Ethan spoke. "Something happened in town?" Clara's hand stilled. "No." "You sure?" She forced herself to meet his eyes. "People are curious, that's all." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and picked up his spoon. "They'll talk. That's what people do out here. Doesn't mean anything." Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd heard that before too. After supper, she retreated to her room, closing the door and sinking onto the edge of the bed. Through the thin wall, she could hear Ethan reading to Molly, his voice low and steady, the words of some familiar story she couldn't quite make out. It was a good sound, a gentle sound, the kind of sound that came from a home, not a hiding place. Clara pressed her hands to her face and tried not to think about how much it would hurt when she had to leave. Because she would leave. She always did, young. 2 weeks passed, the rhythm held, the work continued, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. Molly started speaking. Not often, not much, but small words, whispered hesitantly when Clara asked questions. "Yes." "No." "Please." Once, while they were kneading bread together, the girl looked up and said very quietly, "You smell like cinnamon." Clara's throat closed. "Do I?" Molly nodded. "Is that all right?" Another nod. "Mama smelled like lavender." Clara's hands stilled in the dough, her heart breaking and mending all at once. She looked down at the small girl beside her, flour dusting her cheeks, her expression solemn and open, and felt something crack inside her chest. "That's a beautiful thing to remember," Clara said softly. Molly didn't answer, but she leaned closer, just slightly, and Clara understood. "You're safe. I trust you. Don't leave." That night, after Molly had gone to bed, and Ethan was finishing the last of his coffee, Clara stood at the window, staring out at the darkening hills. "She's talking to you," Ethan said quietly. Clara turned, found him watching her from the table, his expression unreadable. "A little," Clara admitted. "She hasn't done that. Not since—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Not in a long time." Clara didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Ethan set his cup down, his gaze steady. "I don't know what brought you here, Miss Reed, and I won't ask, but whatever it was—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm glad you came." Clara's breath caught. "She needs someone." Ethan continued, his voice rough. And I can't be everything she needs. I've tried, but I'm just... He stopped, shaking his head. You're her father, Clara said quietly. That's everything. Maybe. Ethan stood, carrying his cup to the basin. But she needs more than a father who doesn't know how to talk about feelings. She needs... He trailed off, his shoulders tense. She needs what you're giving her. Clara's throat tightened. I'm just cooking. No. Ethan turned, his eyes meeting hers across the small room. You're not. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Ethan nodded once and headed for the door. Good night, Miss Reed. Good night. He paused in the doorway, his back to her. And Clara? Her heart stumbled at the sound of her name. Thank you. Then he was gone, and Clara stood alone in the dim kitchen, her hands trembling, her chest aching with something she couldn't name. She'd come here to disappear. But somehow, without meaning to, she was becoming visible again, and that terrified her more than anything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Ethan brought it in from town, his expression grim, and set it on the table without a word. Clara was kneading dough, Molly beside her shaping small rolls, and she didn't notice at first, not until Ethan cleared his throat. This came for you. Clara looked up, her hand stilling. The envelope was thin, travel-worn, addressed in handwriting she didn't recognize. Her stomach dropped. I'll leave you to it, Ethan said quietly, and took Molly with him, the two of them disappearing into the other room. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and picked up the letter, her fingers numb. She didn't have to open it to know what it said. They'd found her. She sank into a chair, broke the seal, and read. The words blurred together, sharp and cold. Her name, her past, accusations she'd thought buried. Someone had written to the postmaster asking questions. Someone had been looking. Clara's hand shook as she folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. She'd known this would happen. She always knew. The only question was how long she had before everything fell apart. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the hills in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful, peaceful, temporary. Behind her, she heard Molly's soft laughter, Ethan's low murmur in response. A family, a home, everything she'd ever wanted and everything she could never keep. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. I should leave tonight, she thought, before they come, before Molly gets hurt, before Ethan has to choose. But even as the thought formed, she knew she wouldn't. Not yet. Not until she had to. Because for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Reed didn't want to run. She wanted to stay. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Clara burned the letter in the stove that night, watching the paper curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. The words were gone, but their weight settled into her bones like winter cold, heavy, persistent, impossible to shake. She didn't sleep, just lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her, counting the hours until dawn, when she'd have to face Ethan and Molly and pretend everything was fine. By the time gray light crept through her window, Clara had made a decision. She would stay quiet, work hard, keep her head down. Maybe, if she was careful enough, invisible enough, whatever storm was coming would pass her by. People lost interest. Trails went cold. It had happened before. It could happen again. She rose, dressed, and went to the kitchen, moving through the familiar motions with mechanical precision. Coffee, biscuits, gravy. The rhythm steadied her, gave her hands something to do besides shake. Molly appeared as the sun broke over the hills, barefoot and sleepy-eyed, her doll tucked under one arm. She climbed into her usual chair and watched Clara with that quiet intensity that had become routine. "Morning, sweet girl," Clara said softly, and was rewarded with a small smile. "Morning." The word was barely a whisper, but it landed in Clara's chest like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples of warmth and pain outward in equal measure. Ethan came in a few minutes later, hat already on, ready for the day. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, his gaze moving between Clara and Molly. "You all right?" he asked Clara quietly. She kept her eyes on the biscuits. "Fine." That letter yesterday. It was nothing. The lie came easily, smooth as worn leather. Just someone I used to know, wondering where I'd gone. Ethan was silent for a moment, and Clara could feel him weighing her words, testing them for truth. But he didn't push, just nodded slowly and took his coffee to the table. They ate in near silence, the only sound the scrape of forks and the occasional creak of the house. When Ethan finished, he stood, brushing crumbs from his shirt. "I'll be in the south pasture today, checking the water line." Clara nodded. "I'll have supper ready." He paused at the door, glancing back at Molly. "You be good for Miss Reed." Molly nodded solemnly. Ethan's gaze shifted to Clara, and something passed between them, unspoken, complicated, too fragile to name. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Clara exhaled slowly and began clearing the table. Molly slid off her chair and started helping without being asked, carrying plates to the basin with careful hands. "Can we make cookies today?" the girl asked quietly. Clara's throat tightened. "If you'd like." "Mama used to make them, with sugar on top." "Then we'll make them just like that." Molly's face brightened, and Clara felt something twist in her chest. This child had already lost so much. Her mother, her sense of safety, the sound of laughter in this house. And now Clara was here, filling spaces that didn't belong to her, knowing full well she'd have to leave them empty again. But not today. Today, she could make cookies. They worked together through the morning, Molly chattering more than Clara had ever heard. Soft, hesitant words about her mother, about the ranch, about a stray cat that sometimes came to the barn. Clara listened and responded gently, careful not to press, letting the conversation flow at the child's pace. By noon, the kitchen smelled like butter and sugar, and a plate of golden cookies sat cooling on the table. Molly ate 3, her legs swinging beneath her chair, a dusting of sugar on her chin. "These are good," she announced. "Your mama taught you well," Clara said. Molly's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you have a mama?" The question caught Clara off guard. She set down the rag she'd been using to wipe the counter and turned to face the girl. "I did. A long time ago." "Where is she now?" "She died when I was young, not much older than you." Molly's eyes went wide and serious. "That's sad." "It was," Clara agreed quietly. "But I remember her, the way you remember yours. And that helps." Molly considered this, then nodded slowly. "Papa says remembering is important." "He's right." The girl fell silent, swinging her legs again, her gaze drifting toward the window. Then very softly she said, "I'm glad you're here." Clara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back, and managed a smile. "I'm glad too." It was the truth, and that made it harder. That afternoon, while Molly napped in her room, Clara sat on the porch with a basket of mending. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. She worked slowly, her needle moving in steady rhythm, her mind refusing to settle. The letter had changed something, made the ground beneath her feet feel less solid. She'd been here 3 weeks, long enough to fall into routine, short enough that leaving wouldn't destroy everything. But Molly's words echoed in her mind. "I'm glad you're here." And Ethan's from the night before. "I'm glad you came." Claire set the mending aside and pressed her hands to her face. She'd spent so long running, she'd forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, to matter, to be something other than a problem people needed to solve or a scandal they needed to avoid. Here, in this quiet, wounded place, she'd become something different. A cook, a companion, maybe even, in some small way, necessary. And the thought of losing that, of walking away from Molly's trust and Ethan's quiet gratitude, hurt more than any accusation ever had. A sound pulled her from her thoughts. Hoofbeats, coming fast. Clara stood, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and watched as a rider approached from the direction of town. A woman, dressed in dark traveling clothes, riding with purpose. Clara's stomach dropped. The woman reined in her horse at the edge of the yard and dismounted with practiced ease. She was older, maybe 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that might have been handsome once but had hardened into something unyielding. "You're Clara Reed." It wasn't a question. Clara's hands tightened on the porch rail. I am. The woman tied her horse and approached, her gaze sharp and assessing. My name is Margaret Winters. I run the church auxiliary in town. Clara said nothing, just waited. Word's gotten around that you're working for Ethan Cole, Margaret continued, her tone brisk and businesslike. Folks are curious about you, where you came from, why you're here. I'm his cook, Clara said evenly. That's all. Is it? Margaret's eyes narrowed. Because the thing about small towns, Miss Reed, is that people talk. And when a woman shows up out of nowhere, traveling alone, taking work in a widower's house, well, people wonder. Clara's pulse hammered in her ears, but she kept her voice steady. There's nothing to wonder about. I needed work. Mr. Cole needed help. It's a simple arrangement. Maybe, Margaret crossed her arms, but I've seen women like you before, women running from something, and I've seen the damage they leave behind when their past catches up. The words were a knife, sharp and deliberate. Clara forced herself to breathe. I'm not running from anything. Then you won't mind if I ask a few questions. I do mind, actually. Clara straightened, meeting the woman's gaze head on. What I do and where I've been is my business. Not yours, not anyone's. Margaret's expression hardened. It becomes my business when it affects this community. Ethan Cole is a good man. His daughter is an innocent child. If you're bringing trouble to their door, I'm not. Can you prove that? The silence that followed was crushing. Clara couldn't prove anything. She had no letters of reference, no history she could safely share, no way to defend herself without revealing exactly what she was running from. And Margaret knew it. Clara could see the satisfaction in the woman's eyes, the certainty that she'd cornered something dangerous. I thought not, Margaret said quietly. I'll be watching you, Miss Reed. And if I find out you're not what you claim, if you bring shame or scandal to this family, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. She turned and walked back to her horse, mounting with the same efficient grace she'd arrived with. Then she was gone, riding back toward town in a cloud of dust and unspoken threats. Clara stood on the porch, trembling, her hands gripping the rail so hard her knuckles went white. It had started. The questions, the suspicion, the slow, inevitable unraveling of everything she'd tried to build. Behind her, the door creaked open. Clara turned and found Molly standing there, her face pale and worried. Who was that lady? The girl asked. Clara forced a smile. Just someone from town. Nothing to worry about. But Molly's eyes were too sharp, too knowing. She made you sad. I'm all right, sweetheart. Molly stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Clara's waist, pressing her face against Clara's apron. The gesture was so sudden, so unexpected, that Clara's breath caught. Don't be sad, Molly whispered. Please. Clara's arms came up slowly, carefully, and she held the child close, her throat aching. I won't be. I promise. It was another lie. But this one she told for Molly, not for herself. When Ethan came home that evening, Clara had supper ready and her expression carefully composed. She set the food on the table. Roasted chicken, potatoes, greens from the small garden, and sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. Molly chattered about the cookies they'd made, her voice bright and animated, and Ethan listened with the kind of attention that made Clara's chest ache. This was a good man, a kind father, someone who deserved better than a cook with secrets and a past that wouldn't stay buried. After Molly went to bed, Ethan lingered at the table, nursing his coffee, his gaze thoughtful. Something on your mind? Clara asked quietly. He looked up, his expression unreadable. You had a visitor today. Clara's heart sank. Of course. Someone had seen. Someone always saw. Margaret Winters, she confirmed. Ethan's jaw tightened. What did she want? To ask questions? To warn me? Clara met his eyes. To make sure I know I'm being watched. She has no right. She has every right, Clara interrupted gently. This is her community. You're part of it. She's protecting what's hers. You didn't do anything wrong. Clara wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that innocence mattered, that truth would be enough. But she'd learned better. It doesn't matter if I did or didn't, she said quietly. What matters is what people believe. And once they decide to believe the worst, She trailed off, shaking her head. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his gaze intense. What happened to you, Clara? The question hung between them, heavy and unavoidable. Clara looked away, her throat tight. I can't tell you that. Can't or won't? Both. She forced herself to meet his eyes again. I'm sorry. I know that's not fair to you. But if I tell you, it won't change anything. It'll just give you something else to worry about. Ethan was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he sat back, his expression softening slightly. I don't need to know everything, he said quietly. But I need to know you're safe, that Molly's safe. I would never hurt her, or you. I know that. The certainty in his voice was almost unbearable. But if someone's coming for you, if there's danger, I need to be prepared. Clara's hands trembled in her lap. There's no danger. Just talk. Suspicion. It'll pass. Will it? She didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. Ethan stood slowly, carrying his cup to the basin. He washed it in silence, his movements deliberate, and Clara watched him, memorizing the way the lamplight caught his profile, the way his shoulders carried weight he never complained about. I meant what I said the other night, he said finally, his back still to her. I'm glad you're here. Molly is... she's different, happier, and that's because of you. Clara's vision blurred. Ethan, whatever happened before, he continued, turning to face her, it doesn't matter to me. You're a good person, Clara. I can see that. And anyone who says otherwise doesn't know you the way I do. The words broke something inside her. Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You don't know me, she said, her voice shaking. You don't know what I've done, what people think I've done, and when they come here, when they tell you, you'll wish you'd never hired me. Ethan crossed the room in 3 long strides and caught her hand, his grip firm but gentle. Then tell me now. Let me decide for myself. Clara looked down at their joined hands, at the calluses on his palm and the steadiness of his grip, and felt something crack inside her chest. I was accused of theft, she whispered. At the boarding house where I worked. Money went missing, and I was the easiest person to blame. The owner's wife hated me, thought I was inappropriate, too friendly with the male boarders. When the money disappeared, she said it was me. Ethan's grip didn't loosen. There was no trial, Clara continued, her voice barely audible. No proof. But there didn't need to be. Everyone believed her. I lost my job, my room, my reputation. So I left, and I kept leaving. Every time someone found out, every time the story followed me, I moved on. She forced herself to look up, to meet his eyes. That's who I am, Ethan. A woman everyone thinks is a thief, a liar, someone not to be trusted. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his thumb brushing absently over her knuckles. Then he said, very quietly, Did you take the money? No? Then that's all I need to know. Clara's breath hitched. It's not that simple. It is to me. His gaze was steady, unwavering. I don't care what some stranger said about you 3 towns ago. I care about what I see. And I see someone who works hard, who's kind to my daughter, who shows up every morning and does what needs doing without complaint. That's who you are, Clara, not whatever lies someone told. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. You say that now, but when Margaret Winters comes back with her questions, when the whole town starts talking, let them talk. Ethan's voice was firm, final. I know who you are. That's enough. Clara pulled her hand free, wrapping her arms around herself. It won't be. You'll see. She turned and walked to her room, closing the door softly behind her, and sank onto the edge of the bed. Ethan's words echoed in her mind, warm and impossible. I know who you are. But he didn't, not really. He knew the woman who made breakfast and played with his daughter, the woman who kept her head down and her secrets close. He didn't know the woman who'd been run out of 3 towns, who'd slept in stables and skipped meals to save money for the next stagecoach ticket, who'd learned to disappear because staying was too dangerous. That woman knew better than to believe in second chances. That woman knew how this story ended, and it never ended well. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of voices outside her window. She rose quickly, pulled on her dress, and pushed the curtain aside. 3 women stood in the yard, speaking with Ethan near the barn. Clara recognized Margaret Winters immediately, her posture rigid and accusatory. The other 2 were younger, dressed in town clothes, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. Clara's stomach twisted. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she didn't need to. The way they gestured toward the house, the way Ethan's shoulders tensed, told her everything. They were here because of her. Clara stepped back from the window, her hands shaking. She should have left last night, should have packed her bag and walked away before it came to this. But she hadn't, and now Ethan was out there defending a woman he barely knew to people who had no reason to trust her. The front door opened, and Molly appeared, still in her nightgown, her face creased with worry. "Papa's talking to the church ladies," Clara forced a smile. "I know, sweetheart. They don't like you." The words were simple, matter-of-fact, and devastating. Clara knelt down, taking Molly's hands in hers. "Some people don't trust strangers, that's all. It's not personal." "But you're nice," Molly insisted, her voice rising. "You make cookies, and you read to me, and you don't yell." Clara's throat closed. "Thank you, sweet girl. I don't want you to leave." The words hit like a physical blow. Clara pulled Molly close, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of sleep and innocence and trust she didn't deserve. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. Another lie. But maybe, just maybe, if she said it enough times, it would become true. Outside, the voices grew louder. Clara heard Ethan's tone shift, still controlled, but edged with something harder. Warning. Then the women left, their skirts swishing as they walked back toward the road, their heads bent together in conspiratorial whispers. Ethan stood in the yard for a long moment, his hands on his hips, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Then he turned and walked back to the house. Clara stood, smoothing her skirt, and met him at the door. His face was tight, his jaw set, but when he looked at her, his expression softened slightly. "They wanted to know about you," he said quietly. "Where you came from, why you're here, whether I'd checked your references." Clara's chest ached. "And what did you tell them?" "That it's none of their business." His voice was firm. "And that if they have concerns, they can take them up with me directly, not gossip about them in town." Clara closed her eyes. "Ethan, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He stepped closer, his gaze holding hers. "You work for me. You're part of this household. And I won't have people treating you like a criminal based on nothing but suspicion. It's not nothing to them. Then they'll have to live with disappointment." He paused, then added more gently, "You're staying, Clara, unless you want to leave." Clara's breath caught. "Do you want me to?" "No." The word was simple, absolute, and it shattered the last of her defenses. She looked at him, this quiet, stubborn man who'd given her a job when she'd had nowhere else to go, who trusted her with his daughter, who stood between her and a town full of judgment without flinching. And she realized, with a clarity that was almost painful, that she didn't want to leave either. Not this house. Not this child. Not this man who saw past her history to something worth defending. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stay." Ethan's expression shifted. Relief, maybe, or something deeper. And he nodded once. "Good." Then he turned and went back outside, and Clara stood in the doorway watching him go, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. She'd just made a choice, to stop running, to stay, to risk everything on the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. And God help her, she had no idea if she'd made the right one. The decision to stay changed everything and nothing all at once. Clara still rose before dawn, still made coffee and biscuits, still moved through the house with quiet efficiency. But now there was a weight to her presence, a permanence she hadn't allowed herself before. She stopped mentally cataloging escape routes, stopped keeping her bag half-packed beneath the bed, stopped measuring each day as if it might be her last. And the town noticed. Over the following weeks, the whispers grew louder. Women stopped talking when Clara walked into the general store. Men tipped their hats but didn't meet her eyes. Children stared with the blunt curiosity of youth, repeating things they'd heard their parents say in lowered voices. Margaret Winters became a regular presence, riding out to the ranch every few days with some new concern. The church auxiliary needed donations. The school needed volunteers. Did Mr. Cole know about the woman he'd hired? Had he considered what example this set for his daughter? Ethan met each visit with the same steady refusal to engage. He was polite but unyielding, and each time Margaret left, Clara could see the frustration tightening her features. "She won't stop," Clara said one evening, after the woman had ridden away yet again, her spine rigid with disapproval. Ethan was washing up at the basin, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. "Don't care if she does or doesn't. But the town? The town can think whatever it wants." He dried his hands and turned to face her. "I'm not sending you away because some busybody decides she doesn't like you." Clara twisted the dish towel in her hands. "It's not just about me. Molly will hear things. Children talk. Then I'll talk to her." His voice gentled. "Clara, I know this is hard, but running won't make it better. It'll just mean you're somewhere else with the same problem." He was right, and Clara hated that he was right, because running had always been her solution, the only one that kept her safe. But safety had also kept her alone, kept her from ever having anything worth protecting. Now she had Molly's laughter in the kitchen, Ethan's quiet presence at the supper table, the smell of bread rising and coffee brewing and all the small rituals that made a place feel like home. She had something to lose, and that terrified her more than any accusation. On Sunday morning, Ethan surprised her. "We're going to church," he announced over breakfast, his tone matter-of-fact. Clara's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "What?" "Church." He buttered a biscuit, not looking at her. "Service starts at 10. We should leave by 9:30. Molly's eyes went wide. "We haven't gone since Mama died." "I know." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "But we're going today." Clara set down her cup carefully. "Ethan, I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because everyone will stare. They'll whisper. They'll make assumptions. Let them." He looked up then, his gaze steady and determined. "You're part of this family. You work here, you live here, and you deserve to be treated with the same respect as anyone else. If we hide, it just confirms what they already think, that you've got something to be ashamed of. I don't want to make things harder for you. You're not." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "They are. And the only way to stop it is to show them they're wrong." Clara looked down at his hand, rough, calloused, warm, and felt something shift in her chest. This man barely knew her, had every reason to take the easier path and let her fade into the background. But instead, he was choosing to stand beside her in the one place where judgment would be harshest. "All right," she whispered. "We'll go." Molly clapped her hands together. "Can I wear my blue dress?" "You can wear whatever you like, sweetheart," Clara said, managing a smile despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. They arrived at the church just before 10, and the moment Clara stepped down from the wagon, she felt every eye turned toward her. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Smiles froze. The air itself seemed to thicken with unspoken judgment. Ethan offered Clara his arm, and she took it, grateful for the steadiness of his presence. Molly walked between them, her small hand tucked into Clara's, her Sunday dress crisp and clean. They made their way up the church steps, and the crowd parted like water around a stone. No one spoke to them. No one welcomed them. They just stared, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Margaret Winters stood near the entrance, her face a mask of tight disapproval. When Ethan nodded to her, she didn't return the gesture. Just watched them pass with eyes like flint. Inside, the church was simple and whitewashed, with wooden pews arranged in neat rows and sunlight streaming through tall windows. Ethan led them to a pew near the middle, not hiding in the back, Clara noted, but not claiming prominence either, a statement of quiet defiance. They sat, and Clara kept her eyes forward, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight. She could feel the weight of stares on her back, hear the rustle of whispers that hadn't quite died down. Beside her, Molly pressed closer, and Clara put an arm around the girl's shoulders. The child looked up at her, eyes wide and worried. "It's all right," Clara whispered. "We're all right." The service began, and the preacher, a thin man with kind eyes and a gentle voice, spoke about forgiveness and grace and loving thy neighbor. Clara wondered if anyone was listening, wondered if the words even mattered when hearts were already hardened. When the final hymn ended and people began filing out, Clara braced herself. But Ethan didn't move. He sat there, waiting until the crowd had thinned, until most of the congregation had spilled out into the sunlight. Then he stood, offered Clara his hand, and walked with her down the aisle. Outside, groups of people clustered in the churchyard, talking and laughing. Most ignored them. A few nodded curtly. Margaret Winters stood with a circle of women, their heads bent together, their eyes following Clara like hawks tracking prey. Then a man stepped forward. He was older, weathered, with gray streaking his beard and a hat crushed between work-worn hands. Clara didn't know him, but his face was familiar in the way all frontier men looked familiar, hard-used, cautious, but not unkind. "Ethan," he said, his voice gruff but not hostile. "Tom." Ethan shook his hand. "Good to see you." The man's gaze shifted to Clara, assessing but not cruel. "This the woman you hired?" "This is Clara Reed," Ethan confirmed. "Clara, this is Tom Bennett, runs the ranch west of here." Clara inclined her head. "Mr. Bennett." Tom studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Heard talk about you." "I'm sure you have," Clara said quietly. "Ethan speaks well of you," Tom continued. "Says you're good with his girl. That means something." The words were simple, but they landed like a benediction. "Thank you," Clara managed. Tom settled his hat back on his head and turned to Ethan. "You need anything, you let me know." "Appreciate it." The older man walked away, and Clara exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. "See," Ethan said quietly, "not everyone's against you." But as they walked to the wagon, Clara could feel Margaret Winter's eyes boring into her back, could hear the whispers rising again, sharper now, edged with something that felt like threat. One ally didn't erase a town full of suspicion, but it was something. The next week passed in tense quiet. Clara kept to the ranch, avoiding town except when absolutely necessary. Molly grew more clingy, following Clara from room to room, her usual chatter replaced by watchful silence. "She's scared," Ethan said one night after the girl had finally fallen asleep. They were sitting on the porch, the sky vast and star-scattered above them, the air cool and sharp with the promise of autumn. "Of what?" Clara asked, though she already knew. "That you'll leave." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "She lost her mother. Now she's attached to you, and she hears the talk, knows people want you gone." Clara's throat tightened. "I won't leave. Not unless you ask me to." "I won't." The certainty in his voice made her chest ache. "But she doesn't know that," Clara said softly. "She's 6. All she knows is that people leave." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Maybe we should tell her you're staying. Make it official." Clara turned to look at him, her heart pounding. "Official how?" He met her gaze, and there was something vulnerable in his expression, something that made her breath catch. "You could stay permanently," he said carefully, "not just as a cook, as family." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Clara wasn't sure she understood. "Ethan, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he said quickly. "I just mean, Molly needs stability. She needs to know you're not going anywhere. And the only way to make that clear, to her and to the town, is to make it real." Clara's pulse raced. "What are you saying?" Ethan looked away, his jaw working. "I'm saying we could marry. In name, if nothing else. Give Molly a mother. Give you protection. Give the town something to accept instead of fight." The proposal was so unexpected, so practical and devoid of romance, that Clara didn't know how to respond. "You don't love me," she said finally. "No," Ethan admitted, "but I respect you. I trust you. And I think, given time, that could be enough." Clara stood abruptly, her hands shaking. "You can't marry someone out of obligation." "Why not?" He stood too, facing her in the dim light. "People do it all the time out here. Marriages of convenience, partnerships. It doesn't have to be about grand passion. It just has to work." "But what about you?" Clara's voice broke. "Don't you want more than that?" Ethan's expression softened. "I had more. I had love. And I lost it. I'm not looking to replace what I had with Sarah. I'm just trying to build something that works for Molly. And for you, if you'll have it. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, her mind spinning. Marriage, permanence, a life tied to this place, this man, this child. Everything she'd been running from, and everything she'd been searching for all tangled together. I need to think, she whispered. Take all the time you need. Ethan's voice was gentle. But know this, Clara. I'm not going to let them drive you away. Whether you marry me or not, you're safe here. I'll make sure of it. The promise broke something inside her. Clara turned and went inside, her vision blurred with tears, and didn't stop until she reached her room. She closed the door, sank onto the bed, and let herself cry for the first time since she'd arrived. She cried for the girl she'd been before the accusations, for the woman she'd become in all the years of running, for the future she'd never let herself imagine, and the present that was more complicated and terrifying and beautiful than anything she'd expected. And she cried because Ethan's proposal, practical and unromantic as it was, felt like the first real choice anyone had offered her in years. Not a command, not an assumption, just a question, asked with respect and left for her to answer. The next morning, Clara woke to chaos. Shouting, the sound of hoofbeats, Molly's frightened voice calling for her father. Clara threw on her robe and ran to the window. 3 men on horseback were in the yard, and Ethan stood between them and the house, his rifle in his hands, his stance protective and unyielding. Clara's blood went cold. She grabbed her dress, pulled it on with shaking hands, and ran outside. Told you to leave, one of the men was saying, his voice hard and threatening. We don't want your kind here. And I told you this is my land, Ethan shot back. You've got no business on it. The man sneered. We've got business with her. He pointed at Clara as she stepped onto the porch. The thief you're sheltering. Clara's stomach dropped. She's not a thief, Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. That's not what we heard. Another man spoke up, younger, his eyes bright with the kind of cruelty that came from pack mentality. Word is she stole from her last employer, and the one before that. She's a con artist, Cole, and you're too blind to see it. Get off my property, Ethan said. Or what? The first man leaned forward in his saddle, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. You'll shoot us? That'll just prove we're right, that you've been bewitched by a criminal. Clara's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, to tell them they were wrong, but the words stuck in her throat, useless against the weight of their conviction. Then Molly appeared in the doorway, her face pale and terrified. Papa? Everything stopped. Ethan's expression shifted, the anger giving way to something more controlled. He lowered the rifle slightly, his gaze never leaving the men. You've made your point, he said quietly. Now leave, before my daughter sees something she shouldn't. The men exchanged glances. Then, slowly, the leader pulled his horse around. This isn't over, Cole, he said. That woman brings nothing but trouble. And when it comes, when she ruins you the way she's ruined everyone else, don't say we didn't warn you. They rode off, and the silence they left behind was deafening. Ethan set the rifle down and turned to Molly, scooping her up into his arms. It's all right, sweetheart. They're gone. They were mean, Molly said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I know. He carried her inside, and Clara followed, her legs weak, her mind reeling. In the kitchen, Ethan set Molly down and knelt in front of her, his hands on her shoulders. Listen to me, he said gently. Those men are wrong. Miss Clara didn't do anything bad. They're just scared of things they don't understand. But they said, I don't care what they said. Ethan's voice was firm. What matters is the truth. And the truth is that Clara is a good person who's been kind to you and kind to me. Do you believe that? Molly looked over at Clara, her eyes searching. Then she nodded. Yes. Good. Ethan pulled her into a hug. Then that's all that matters. But as he stood and met Clara's gaze over Molly's head, Clara saw the worry there. The realization that this was only the beginning. Later, after Molly had been distracted with a new doll Ethan carved for her, Clara and Ethan stood in the barn, the space dim and filled with the smell of hay and leather. They'll come back, Clara said quietly. Probably. And next time they might bring more men, or worse. Ethan didn't deny it, just leaned against the stall door, his arms crossed, his expression grim. "I should leave," Clara said, "before this gets worse." "No." "Ethan, no." He pushed off the door and crossed to her, his gaze intense. "I told you I wouldn't let them drive you away. I meant it. This isn't about them driving me away. It's about keeping you and Molly safe. We're safer with you here than without you." His voice was rough, urgent. "Molly needs you, and I—" He stopped, his jaw working. Clara waited, her heart pounding. "I need you too," he said finally, the words seeming to cost him. "I didn't realize how much until those men showed up, and I thought about what it would mean if you left. The house would go back to being empty. Molly would stop smiling, and I'd go back to just existing, not living, just getting through." Clara's breath caught. "You can't mean that." "I do." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the determination. "Clara, I know I'm asking a lot. I know this isn't fair to you, but I'm asking anyway. Marry me. Not just for Molly, not just to stop the gossip, but because I want you to stay. Because you make this place feel like a home again." Clara's vision blurred. "I'm scared." "I know." "What if they're right? What if I bring nothing but trouble?" "Then we'll face it together." He took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "You're not alone anymore, Clara. You don't have to keep running. Let me stand with you. Let me protect you. Let me give you the life you deserve." The words cracked her open. Clara had spent so long believing she didn't deserve anything, not kindness, not safety, not love. She'd accepted that her life would be defined by running, by survival, by the cold comfort of solitude. But here was a man offering her something different. Not rescue, but partnership. Not pity, but respect. A chance to stop running, a chance to belong. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan's eyes widened. "Yes?" "Yes." Clara's voice grew stronger. "I'll marry you." The relief that crossed his face was so profound it made her chest ache. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Clara let herself lean into him, let herself feel the warmth and strength and steadiness she'd been denying herself. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. Clara closed her eyes, breathing him in, leather and wood smoke and something essentially him. She was still scared, still uncertain, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. But for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. The wedding was planned for the following Sunday, quick and simple. Ethan rode into town the next day to speak with the preacher, and Clara stayed at the ranch with Molly, trying to wrap her mind around what she'd agreed to. Marriage. To a man she barely knew, to a life she'd never imagined. But as Molly chattered excitedly about the wedding, about having a mother again, about all the things they'd do together, Clara felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace. Not yet. But hope. Fragile, terrifying, beautiful hope. On Wednesday, Margaret Winters came to the ranch one last time. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard the horse approach. She turned, clothespin still in hand, and watched as the older woman dismounted with her usual brisk efficiency. "Mrs. Winters," Clara said evenly. "Miss Reed." Margaret's gaze was cold, assessing. "I heard about the wedding. News travels fast." "It does." Margaret stepped closer, her expression hard. "I came to give you one last chance to do the right thing." Clara's hands tightened on the laundry. "And what would that be?" "Leave, before you destroy that man and his child." "I'm not going to destroy anyone." "You already are." Margaret's voice was sharp. "Ethan Cole was a respected man in this community. Now he's the subject of gossip and judgment because of you. His daughter will grow up with a cloud over her head because her father married a woman with a shameful past." Clara forced herself to breathe. "My past is my own. It doesn't define who I am now." "Doesn't it?" Margaret's smile was thin and cruel. "You can dress it up however you like, Miss Reed. You can marry him and pretend to be respectable. But people know the truth, and they won't forget." "Then they'll have to live with their suspicions," Clara said quietly. "Because I'm not leaving." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's mine to make." The older woman stared at her for a long moment, then turned and mounted her horse. When this falls apart, and it will, don't say I didn't warn you. She rode away, and Clara stood there in the yard, the laundry forgotten, her hands shaking. But beneath the fear and the doubt, there was something else. Defiance. For the first time in her life, Clara wasn't running from judgment. She was standing still and daring it to do its worst. And that, she realized, was its own kind of courage. That evening, Clara found Molly in her room, sitting cross-legged on the bed with a wooden box in her lap. The child looked up when Clara knocked softly on the doorframe, her expression solemn and thoughtful. "Can I come in?" Clara asked. Molly nodded, patting the space beside her. Clara sat down carefully, and the child opened the box with reverent hands. Inside was a collection of small treasures, a pressed flower, a smooth river stone, a length of blue ribbon, and nestled at the bottom, a small silver locket. "These were Mama's," Molly said quietly, touching each item with gentle fingers. Clara's chest tightened. "They're beautiful." Molly picked up the locket and opened it. Inside was a tiny portrait of a woman with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Sarah, Ethan's first wife, the woman whose absence still haunted this house. "She was pretty," Molly said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And she smelled like flowers. And she sang to me every night. She sounds wonderful." She was. Molly closed the locket carefully and looked up at Clara, her eyes searching. "Do you think she'd be mad that Papa's marrying you?" The question pierced Clara's heart. She chose her words carefully, knowing they mattered more than almost anything she'd ever said. "I think your Mama loved your Papa very much, and I think she loved you even more. And people who love that deeply, they want the people they leave behind to be happy, to not be lonely. Are you going to make Papa happy?" "I'm going to try my very best." Molly was quiet for a moment, turning the locket over in her small hands. Then she said, very softly, "Will you be my Mama now?" Clara's breath caught. She reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind Molly's ear. "I could never replace your Mama, sweetheart. No one could. But I can love you. I can take care of you. I can be here when you need me. If that's enough." "It's enough." Molly leaned against Clara's shoulder, clutching the locket to her chest. "I don't want you to leave. I won't. I promise. Even when people are mean, even then." Molly tilted her head back to look at Clara, her expression suddenly fierce. "Good, because I'll fight anyone who tries to take you away." Clara laughed despite the tears threatening to spill. "You're very brave." "Papa says brave people aren't the ones who don't get scared. They're the ones who do the right thing even when they are scared. Your Papa is a wise man." "I know." Molly closed the box and set it carefully on her bedside table. Then she wrapped her arms around Clara's waist and held on tight. "I'm glad you're staying. I'm glad you're going to be my Mama." Clara held her close, breathing in the scent of soap and childhood and trust, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd come here running from her past, believing she had nothing to offer anyone. But this child saw something different, saw worth, saw love, saw a future. And maybe Clara thought that was enough to start believing it herself. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Clara had no wedding dress, no family to invite, no traditions to follow. What she had was a simple gray dress she'd mended until it looked almost new, Molly's excited chatter, and Ethan's quiet, steady presence. Tom Bennett and his wife stopped by on Friday with a gift, a quilt pieced together in shades of blue and cream, the stitching fine and careful. "Every new marriage needs something to keep them warm," Mrs. Bennett said, pressing it into Clara's hands with a kind smile. "Welcome to the community, dear. Don't let the gossips run you off. They're just scared of anyone who doesn't fit their narrow ideas." "Thank you," Clara managed, her throat tight. "This is beautiful." "You're doing a good thing," Mrs. Bennett continued, lowering her voice. "That little girl needs a mother, and Ethan, well, he needs someone to remind him he's still alive. You're good for them. Anyone with eyes can see it." The words stayed with Clara through the evening, a warm counterweight to all the suspicion and judgment she'd endured. On Saturday night, Clara lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling and trying to quiet her racing mind. Tomorrow she would marry Ethan Cole. Tomorrow she would become a wife, a mother, a permanent part of this life she'd stumbled into. Tomorrow there would be no more running. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Clara?" Ethan's voice, low and hesitant. She rose and opened the door. He stood in the hallway, still dressed, his hair mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. "Can't sleep either?" she asked quietly. "No." He offered a rueful smile. "Keep thinking about tomorrow." "Second thoughts?" "No." The answer was immediate, certain. "You?" Clara shook her head. "Just nervous." They stood there in the dim hallway, the house silent around them, and Ethan's expression softened. "I want you to know something," he said. "This marriage, it's not just for convenience. Not to me. I meant what I said. You've made this place feel like a home again. And whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the town thinks or says, I'm grateful you're here." Clara's eyes burned. "I'm grateful too, for you, for Molly, for a chance to stop hiding." "You don't have to hide anymore." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Whatever you were before, whoever you were, it doesn't matter. Tomorrow, you'll be my wife. And that means you're under my protection, my name, my family." "Ethan, I know you're scared," he continued gently, "but you're not alone, not anymore, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." The promise settled over her like a blanket, warm and solid and real. "Thank you," she whispered. He squeezed her hand once, then let go. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Clara watched him walk back to his room, and for the first time since she'd arrived at this ranch, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Safe. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the sky a brilliant blue that stretched endless over the Wyoming hills. Clara dressed carefully in her gray dress, her hands shaking as she pinned up her hair. She had no veil, no flowers, no grand preparations. Just herself, scrubbed clean and trembling with equal parts fear and hope. Molly appeared in the doorway, wearing her blue Sunday dress and holding something behind her back. "I have something for you," the girl said shyly. She brought her hands forward, revealing a small bouquet of wildflowers, purple asters and golden black-eyed Susans tied together with the blue ribbon from her treasure box. "Molly," Clara breathed, "these are beautiful." "Plus, every bride needs flowers," Molly said seriously. "That's what Mrs. Bennett told me." Clara knelt down and pulled the child into a hug, careful not to crush the bouquet. "Thank you, sweetheart. They're perfect." "Are you ready?" Molly asked, pulling back to study Clara's face. "I think so. Don't be scared. Papa won't let anything bad happen." The simple faith in those words steadied Clara's racing heart. She stood, took Molly's hand, and together they walked out to where Ethan waited by the wagon. He'd cleaned up, traded his work clothes for a pressed shirt and dark vest, his hair combed back and his jaw freshly shaved. When he saw Clara, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation, or something deeper he didn't have words for. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. Clara's cheeks warmed. "Thank you." He helped her into the wagon, then lifted Molly up beside her, and they set off toward town in silence. The journey felt both endless and far too short. Clara clutched her bouquet and tried to steady her breathing, tried to prepare herself for whatever waited at the church. But nothing could have prepared her for what she saw when they arrived. The churchyard was full. Not just the usual Sunday congregation, but what looked like half the territory. Wagons lined the road. Horses were tied to every available post. People clustered in groups, their voices rising in a low murmur that fell silent the moment Ethan's wagon pulled up. Clara's stomach dropped. "Ethan, I know." His voice was tight. "Stay close to me." He climbed down and came around to help her, his hand firm and reassuring on her waist. Molly grabbed Clara's other hand, and together the three of them walked toward the church. The crowd parted, and Clara could feel every eye on her. Some faces were curious, some hostile, some carefully neutral. Margaret Winters stood near the church steps, her expression triumphant and cold, as if she'd orchestrated this gathering specifically to witness Clara's humiliation. They climbed the steps, and Ethan paused at the door, turning to face the assembled crowd. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Claire and I appreciate your presence on our wedding day." Someone in the back shouted, "She's a thief, Cole! You're making a mistake!" Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Clara Reed is a good woman who's done nothing but work hard and care for my daughter. Whatever rumors you've heard are just that, rumors. And I won't stand here and let you slander her." "Then you're a fool," another voice called out. "Maybe." Ethan's gaze swept the crowd, hard and unyielding. "But I'd rather be a fool who sees the good in people than a coward who tears them down based on gossip." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Then Tom Bennett stepped forward from the crowd, his wife beside him. "I'll stand with you, Ethan. Claire's welcome in this community as far as I'm concerned." A murmur rippled through the gathering. One by one, a handful of other ranchers stepped forward. Not many, maybe 6 or 7, but enough to matter. Margaret Winter's face went rigid with anger. Ethan nodded to Tom, then turned and led Clara and Molly into the church. Inside, the space was cool and dim, the wooden pews empty except for the preacher waiting at the front. He was the same kind-faced man who'd spoken about grace and forgiveness, and when he saw them, his expression softened with genuine warmth. "Ethan, Miss Reed, Molly," he gestured to the front. "Come, let's begin." They walked down the aisle together, their footsteps echoing in the quiet, and took their places before the preacher. Through the open door, Clara could hear the murmur of the crowd outside, could feel their presence like a weight pressing against her shoulders. But then Ethan took her hand, and Molly leaned against her side, and Clara focused on their faces instead of the judgment waiting beyond the walls. The ceremony was simple and brief. The preacher spoke about commitment and partnership, about building a life together through hardship and joy. He asked if they came willingly, if they promised to honor and care for each other. They both said yes, their voices quiet but firm. And then Ethan was sliding a simple gold band onto Clara's finger, his mother's ring, he'd told her, saved all these years. And the preacher was pronouncing them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said with a gentle smile. Ethan hesitated, his eyes searching Clara's face, asking silent permission. She nodded, just slightly, and he leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief, careful, nothing passionate or claiming, just a promise, a beginning. When they pulled apart, Molly threw her arms around both of them, laughing with pure joy. "We're a family now," she said, "a real family." Clara's eyes burned with tears. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." They signed the register, the preacher's signature making it official, and then they turned to leave. But when they stepped out of the church, the crowd was still there, still waiting. Ethan's hand tightened on Clara's, and they walked down the steps together. Margaret Winters stepped forward, blocking their path. "This doesn't change anything," she said coldly. "A marriage license doesn't erase her past, doesn't make her respectable." "No," Ethan agreed, "but it makes her my wife. And that means if you have a problem with her, you have a problem with me." "Then I suppose we do." "So be it." Ethan's voice was calm, final. He guided Clara past the older woman and toward the wagon. But before they could reach it, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd, shouting, the sound of horses, and then a man's voice, sharp and authoritative. "Stop! Everyone stop!" Clara turned, her heart hammering, and saw a man on horseback pushing through the crowd. He was well-dressed, official-looking, with a badge pinned to his vest and a leather satchel slung over his shoulder. A lawman. Clara's blood went cold. The man dismounted and approached, his expression serious. "Ethan Cole?" "That's me," Ethan said, stepping slightly in front of Clara. "I'm Sheriff Blackwood from Cheyenne. I'm looking for a woman named Clara Reed. I was told she might be here." The crowd fell silent, every eye turning to Clara. "I'm Clara Reed," she said, forcing her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. The sheriff's gaze settled on her, assessing. "I need to speak with you, privately." "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of my husband," Clara said, the word foreign and strange on her tongue. The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your husband?" We just married, Ethan said firmly. Clara is my wife, and whatever you think she's done, I don't think she's done anything, the sheriff interrupted. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a sheaf of papers. I've been looking for you for 3 weeks, Mrs. Cole. Your former employer in Kansas has been trying to find you. Clara's knees went weak. Why? Because the real thief was caught. The sheriff handed her the papers. Woman named Abigail Foster, the owner's wife. She confessed to stealing the money and framing you. She's been arrested and charged. Your name has been cleared. The words didn't make sense at first. Clara stared at the papers, at the official seals and signatures, at the words that proclaimed her innocence. Cleared? She whispered. Completely. The sheriff's expression softened. I'm sorry it took so long. The woman covered her tracks well, but her husband finally caught her trying to do it again. He insisted on making things right. He asked me to find you and deliver these personally. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The papers trembled in her hands. She's innocent? Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. Always was, from what I can tell. The sheriff tipped his hat to Clara. You're free to go wherever you please, ma'am. No charges, no accusations. Just a woman who deserves an apology she'll probably never get from the people who wronged her. He mounted his horse and rode away, and the crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Clara stood frozen. The papers clutched to her chest, her mind reeling. Cleared. Innocent. Free. All the years of running, of hiding, of believing she deserved the judgment and suspicion, and it had all been for nothing. She'd been telling the truth all along. Margaret Winters stood in the crowd, her face pale and tight, and for once, she had nothing to say. Tom Bennett stepped forward and addressed the gathering, his voice carrying clear and strong. I think we owe Mrs. Cole an apology. All of us. We judged her without knowing the facts, treated her like a criminal when she was the victim. A few people had the grace to look ashamed. Most just looked uncomfortable. Clara didn't care. She turned to Ethan, and the expression on his face, pride, relief, vindication, broke through the last of her defenses. I told you, he said quietly, pulling her close. I told you they were wrong. You believed me, Clara whispered against his chest. Even when I didn't tell you everything, even when the whole town was against me, you believed me. I knew who you were. His arms tightened around her. I didn't need proof. Molly wrapped herself around both of them, and they stood there in the churchyard, a family forged in defiance and sealed in truth, while the crowd slowly dispersed around them. Later, back at the ranch, after Molly had finally fallen asleep clutching her doll and whispering about having a real family again, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch in the gathering darkness. What will you do with those papers? Ethan asked, nodding toward the documents Clara had set on the table inside. I don't know, Clara admitted. Part of me wants to ride back to every town that ran me off and wave them in their faces. Demand the apologies I deserve. You could. But it won't change anything, will it? Clara looked out at the hills, dark shapes against the star-scattered sky. They'll still remember me as the woman they suspected. The scandal, not the truth. Then forget them, Ethan said quietly. You don't need their validation. You have proof of your innocence. You have people here who believe in you. You have a home. I have you, Clara said, the words barely audible. Yes. Ethan reached over and took her hand. You have me, and Molly, and a life that doesn't require you to keep looking over your shoulder. Clara turned to face him, studying his features in the dim light. This man who'd offered her sanctuary when she had nowhere else to go. Who'd stood between her and a hostile town. Who'd married her not out of passion or romance, but out of something deeper and more enduring. Respect, trust, partnership. I meant my vows, she said softly. I know this started as a practical arrangement, but I meant them. So did I. Ethan's thumb brushed over her wedding band, and maybe, in time, it'll become something more. Or maybe it'll stay exactly what it is. Either way, Clara, you're my wife. You're Molly's mother, and you're home. The word settled over her like a benediction. Home. Not a place to hide, not a temporary refuge, but an actual home with people who wanted her there, who fought for her, who saw her worth even when she couldn't see it herself. Clara leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, and they sat there in the cool night air, two wounded people who'd found something unexpected in each other. Not grand passion, not fairy tale romance, but something real, something solid, something that might, with time and care, grow into the kind of love that lasted. Inside the house, Molly slept peacefully, dreaming of families and futures and all the things she'd thought she'd lost forever. And on the porch, Clara closed her eyes and let herself believe, for the first time in years, that maybe she deserved this. Maybe she deserved to be chosen. Maybe she deserved to stay. The morning after the wedding, Clara woke to birdsong and the unfamiliar weight of a ring on her finger. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of what was now her permanent room, testing the reality of what had happened. Married, cleared, free. The words still felt foreign, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. She rose and dressed, pulling on her work dress out of habit, then paused. She wasn't just the cook anymore. She was Ethan's wife, Molly's mother, the mistress of this house, however modest it might be. The thought made her hands shake. In the kitchen, she found Ethan already up, building the fire in the stove with practiced efficiency. He looked up when she entered, and something passed between them. Awkwardness, maybe, or the strange uncertainty of two people navigating new territory. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning." Clara crossed to the counter, reaching for the coffee tin, but Ethan's hand caught hers gently. "Sit," he said. "Let me." I know you can." His voice was soft but firm. "But you don't have to. Not today." Clara's throat tightened. She nodded and sat at the table, watching as he moved through the space with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. When he set a cup of coffee before her, their fingers brushed, and the contact sent a jolt of awareness through her. This was her husband, this man who barely knew her, who'd chosen her anyway, who'd stood before an entire hostile town and claimed her as his own. "Thank you," she managed. Ethan settled into the chair across from her, cradling his own cup. "We should talk about yesterday." Clara's stomach tightened. "What about it?" "About what happens now." He met her gaze steadily. "The town knows you're innocent. The sheriff's testimony cleared your name, but people don't always let go of their suspicions just because they're proven wrong." "I know." Clara's fingers tightened around her cup. "Margaret Winters won't suddenly decide she likes me. And the people who wanted me gone, they'll just find new reasons to disapprove. Probably." Ethan's expression was grim. "But they'll have to do it knowing you're my wife, that you have legal protection, that any attack on you is an attack on this family. I don't want to make your life harder." "You're not." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Clara, I need you to understand something. I didn't marry you out of obligation or pity. I married you because Molly needs you, because He stopped, his jaw working. "Because this place is better with you in it, and I'll be damned if I let small-minded gossips drive you away." The fierceness in his voice made Clara's chest ache. "What if they try?" "Then we fight." His hand covered hers on the table, warm and solid. "Together." The words settled between them, a promise and a foundation. Before Clara could respond, Molly appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, her hair a tangled mess around her face. She rubbed her eyes sleepily, then broke into a wide smile when she saw them. "You're still here," she said to Clara, her voice filled with relief. "Of course I am." Clara opened her arms and Molly ran to her, climbing into her lap with the easy trust of a child who'd finally stopped waiting for abandonment. "I told you I wouldn't leave." "I know, but I had to check." Molly burrowed against Clara's shoulder. "Can we have pancakes?" Ethan laughed, the sound breaking the tension. "I think we can manage that." They spent the morning together, the three of them moving around the kitchen in a dance that was becoming familiar. Molly chattered about everything and nothing, her voice bright and animated. Ethan worked on fixing a broken hinge on the cupboard. Clara made pancakes and watched them both, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not without complications, but real, chosen. Hers. 3 days later, the first test came. Clara was in town buying supplies when she encountered Margaret Winters outside the general store. The older woman stood with two other ladies from the church auxiliary, their expressions cool and unwelcoming. Clara straightened her shoulders and walked past them toward the entrance. "Mrs. Cole," Margaret said, her voice sharp enough to stop Clara in her tracks. Clara turned slowly. "Mrs. Winters, I suppose you're feeling quite pleased with yourself, vindicated by that sheriff's testimony." "I'm feeling relieved," Clara said carefully, "that the truth finally came out." "The truth?" Margaret's smile was thin and bitter. "The truth is that you brought scandal and disruption to this community. Whether you stole that money or not, you're still a woman who ran from her past, who hid behind lies." "I never lied," Clara said quietly. "I just didn't tell you my whole story, which I wasn't obligated to do. You deceived Ethan Cole. She did no such thing." The voice came from behind Margaret, and all four women turned to see Tom Bennett's wife approaching, her expression stern. Ethan knew exactly what he was getting, a hard-working woman who'd been wronged, and he chose to stand by her, which is more than most of you can say you'd do. Margaret's face flushed. "This doesn't concern you, Helen." "It does when I see you harassing a decent woman who's done nothing but try to build a life." Helen moved to stand beside Clara, her presence solid and reassuring. "Clara, are you finished with your shopping?" "Almost," Clara managed. "Then let's finish together." Helen linked her arm through Clara's and guided her toward the store, leaving Margaret and her companions standing in impotent fury. Inside, Helen squeezed Clara's arm gently. "Don't let them get to you. They're just bitter that they were proven wrong." "I don't understand why they can't let it go," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Because admitting they were wrong means admitting they judged you unfairly, that they were cruel for no reason. And that's harder for some people than doubling down on their prejudice." Helen picked up a bag of flour and added it to her basket. "But you've got friends here too, Clara. Don't forget that." The encounter left Clara shaken, but it also crystallized something important. She couldn't control what people thought or said. She could only control how she responded, and she refused to shrink or hide anymore. That evening, she told Ethan what had happened. "I want to host a dinner," she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. Ethan looked up from the harness he was mending. "A dinner?" "For Tom and Helen Bennett, and maybe a few other families who've been kind to us." Clara twisted her hands in her apron. "I know it's bold. I know people will talk, but I want to show that I'm not ashamed, that we're a real family and this is our home, and we're not hiding." Ethan set down the harness slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You're sure?" "No." Clara laughed nervously. "I'm terrified, but I think it's important." He stood and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Then we'll do it. Whatever you need." The preparations took a week. Clara cleaned the house until it gleamed, made new curtains for the windows, practiced recipes until her hands were sore. Molly helped with a fierce dedication, determined that everything be perfect for their first real gathering as a family. Ethan invited the Bennetts, two other ranching families who'd been friendly, and the preacher and his wife. 7 guests total. Not a large party, but enough to make a statement. The night of the dinner, Clara was so nervous she could barely keep her hands steady. She'd made roast chicken, potatoes, greens from the garden, fresh bread, and 2 pies. The table was set with their best dishes, mismatched and simple, but clean and welcoming. When the first wagon arrived, Clara took a deep breath and went to greet them with Ethan at her side and Molly clutching her skirt. The Bennetts came first, bearing a jar of preserves and warm smiles. Then the Harrises, a young couple with a baby. The Johnsons, older and weathered but kind-eyed. And finally, the preacher and his gentle wife. They gathered in the small house, filling it with voices and laughter, and Clara felt something ease in her chest. This was what she'd been missing all those years of running. Not grand gestures or public vindication, but simple human connection. The warmth of shared food and conversation. The knowledge that she belonged somewhere. After dinner, as the women cleared the table and the men retreated to the porch to smoke, Helen Bennett pulled Clara aside. "This was lovely," she said quietly, "and brave." "It doesn't feel brave," Clara admitted. "It feels necessary. That's what makes it brave." Helen glanced toward the window, where they could see Margaret Winter's house in the distance. a dark silhouette against the twilight. She'll hear about this, about how successful it was, how accepted you are. I didn't do this to spite her. I know, but it'll spite her anyway. And honestly, Helen's smile turned mischievous. I'm not sorry about that. Clara laughed despite herself, and in that moment she felt the last tight coil of fear begin to loosen. She couldn't change everyone's mind, couldn't force acceptance from people determined to withhold it, but she could build her own community, her own life, her own definition of belonging. 2 weeks after the dinner, everything changed. Clara was in the barn gathering eggs when she heard Molly scream. The sound was sharp and terrified, and Clara dropped the basket and ran without thinking. She found the girl outside the barn, her face white with pain, clutching her left arm against her chest. A ladder lay toppled nearby, and Clara's heart stopped. "Molly, what happened?" "I wanted to get the cat down from the loft," Molly sobbed. "But the ladder slipped, and I fell, and my arm hurt so bad." Clara dropped to her knees, her hands gentle as she examined the injury. The arm was bent at a wrong angle, already swelling. Broken. Badly. "Where's your father?" Clara forced her voice to stay calm despite the panic clawing at her throat. "The south pasture, checking fence." Too far. He'd never hear her call. Clara made a decision. "All right, sweetheart, listen to me. We need to get you inside, and I need to set this arm until your father can take you to the doctor. Can you walk?" Molly nodded, tears streaming down her face. Clara helped her up carefully, supporting her weight, and got her into the house. She'd seen broken bones set before, back in the boarding houses when accidents happened and doctors were too expensive or too far away. She knew what needed to be done. She gathered supplies, clean cloths, splints made from kindling wood, whiskey for sterilization and pain. Then she sat Molly down and knelt before her. "This is going to hurt," Clara said gently, holding the girl's gaze. "But I need to do it, or the bone might heal wrong. Can you be brave?" Molly's chin trembled. "Will you stay with me?" "Every second." Clara took the girl's good hand. "I promise." She worked as quickly and carefully as she could, feeling for the break, aligning the bone while Molly screamed and sobbed. It was the worst few minutes of Clara's life, but she didn't stop, didn't hesitate. When it was done, she splinted the arm and wrapped it securely, then pulled Molly into her lap and held her while she cried. "You did so good," Clara murmured, rocking her gently. "So brave. I'm so proud of you." "It still hurts," Molly whimpered. "I know, baby. I know." That was how Ethan found them an hour later, Clara sitting on the floor with Molly in her arms, both of them exhausted and tear-stained but together. "What happened?" His voice was sharp with fear. Clara explained quickly, and Ethan knelt beside them, his face pale as he examined the splint. "We need to get her to the doctor, make sure it's set right." "I know, but I couldn't wait. The bone needed to be aligned." "You did right." Ethan's hand covered hers, his grip tight. "Thank you." They took Molly to town immediately, and the doctor confirmed what Clara had done. The break was clean, properly set, and would heal well with time. "Someone knew what they were doing," the doctor said, glancing at Clara with new respect. "Where'd you learn that?" "Experience," Clara said quietly. "When you can't afford doctors, you learn to manage." On the ride home, with Molly dozing between them, her arm in a proper cast now, Ethan reached over and took Clara's hand. "You saved her from permanent damage," he said quietly. "If that bone had been left misaligned." "I did what needed doing," Clara's voice shook. "I was so scared, Ethan. What if I'd made it worse?" "But you didn't." He squeezed her hand. "You stayed calm and you did what needed doing. That's what mothers do." The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Mother, not cook, not hired help, not even wife, exactly. Mother. "She called for me," Clara whispered. "When she was hurt. Not you, me. Because she knows you'll come." Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. "She trusts you completely, the way a child trusts their mother." Clara looked down at Molly's sleeping face, peaceful now despite the pain, and felt her heart crack open completely. This child trusted her, needed her, loved her. And Clara loved her back with a fierceness that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The incident shifted something fundamental in the town's perception. Word spread about how Clara had set Molly's broken arm with skilled hands and unwavering calm, how she'd stayed with the child through the pain, how she'd known exactly what to do. Even Margaret Winters seemed to soften slightly, though she never apologized. She simply stopped showing up at the ranch with her pointed questions and thinly veiled threats. The whispers changed from "that woman Ethan married" to "Molly's mother." It was a small shift, but it mattered. As autumn deepened and the air turned crisp, Clara found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life with increasing comfort. She learned to read the weather by the color of the sky, to time bread making around Ethan's schedule, to navigate Molly's moods and needs with growing confidence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the relationship between Clara and Ethan began to shift. It started with small things. Ethan's hand lingering on Clara's waist when he helped her down from the wagon, the way his eyes followed her when she moved around the kitchen, the softness in his voice when he said her name. Clara noticed too, the way her pulse quickened when he came in from the fields, dusty and tired, the warmth that spread through her chest when he smiled at something Molly said, the nights she lay awake thinking about the man sleeping in the room down the hall. This wasn't the practical arrangement they'd agreed to anymore. This was becoming something else. One evening in late October, after Molly had gone to bed, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch wrapped in blankets against the chill. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air sharp with the scent of coming winter. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said quietly. "Of course." "Are you happy?" The question surprised her. Clara turned to look at him, his profile shadowed in the darkness. "Yes," she said, and realized it was true. "I am." "Are you?" "More than I thought I'd ever be again." He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "When Sarah died, I thought that was it. That I'd had my chance at happiness and lost it. That the rest of my life would just be about taking care of Molly and keeping the ranch running. And now? Now I think maybe there are different kinds of happiness, different kinds of love." He turned to face her fully. "What we have, Clara, it's not what I had with Sarah. It's quieter, more gradual. But it's real, and it's growing." Clara's breath caught. "Ethan, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just want you to know, this marriage, it started as an arrangement, but somewhere along the way it became something more. For me, at least." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. "For me too," she whispered. The relief on his face was profound. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Then maybe we can let it keep growing. See where it goes." "I'd like that." They sat there in the cold darkness, hands linked, and Clara marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From a woman running from false accusations to a wife and mother building a real life. From someone who believed she deserved nothing to someone who was learning to accept love. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd dreamed of as a girl. It was better. It was real. Winter came hard and fast that year, blanketing the ranch in snow and forcing them into close quarters. Clara learned to navigate the intimacy of family life, shared meals and evenings by the fire, Molly's constant presence, Ethan's quiet companionship. She also learned that love didn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it showed up in the way Ethan made sure there was wood stacked by the door, so Clara wouldn't have to carry it far. In the way he listened when she talked about her day. In the way he touched her shoulder in passing, casual and affectionate. And Clara learned to show her own love in return. In the meals she prepared with extra care. In the way she mended his clothes before he even noticed they needed it. In the stories she told Molly about her own mother, sharing her past in small pieces. On Christmas Eve, Ethan surprised her. After Molly had gone to bed, leaving a plate of cookies for Santa that she was still young enough to believe in, Ethan led Clara to the barn. Inside, he'd set up a small table with candles and 2 cups of hot cider. "What's this?" Clara asked, her voice soft with wonder. "A thank you." Ethan pulled out a chair for her. "For everything you've given us this year." They sat together in the warm barn, surrounded by the quiet sounds of horses and the smell of hay, and Ethan reached into his pocket. "I made this for you," he said, pulling out a small wooden box. Clara opened it with trembling hands. Inside, nestled on a bed of cloth, was a carved wooden bird. A sparrow, delicate and perfect, its wings spread as if in flight. "You were like this when you came here," Ethan said quietly, "ready to fly away at any moment. But you stayed. You chose us, and I wanted you to have something to remember that choice." Clara's vision blurred with tears. "Ethan, it's beautiful." "So are you." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I love you, Clara. Not because I need a mother for Molly or a cook for the ranch, but because you're kind and brave and you make this place feel like home, because I can't imagine my life without you anymore." The words broke through the last of her defenses. "I love you too," Clara whispered. "I didn't think I could. Didn't think I deserved to, but I do. I love you and Molly and this life we're building, and I'm not running anymore. I'm staying. Forever." Ethan stood and pulled her up into his arms, and when he kissed her, it wasn't chaste or careful like at their wedding. It was deep and passionate and full of promise. Clara kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and love into that moment, and felt the final pieces of her broken heart knit back together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, wife." "Merry Christmas, husband." They went back to the house hand in hand, and that night, for the first time, Clara didn't sleep alone in her small room. She fell asleep in Ethan's arms, his warmth surrounding her, his steady heartbeat beneath her ear. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was finally home. Spring came with a rush of green and new life. Molly's arm healed completely, leaving only a faint scar she wore with pride, telling anyone who'd listen about how her mama had fixed it. The ranch flourished under Ethan's careful management and Clara's watchful eye. And one warm April morning, Clara stood on the porch watching Molly chase butterflies in the meadow, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly, and felt a wave of contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his hand covering hers on her stomach. "Are you all right?" he murmured against her hair. "Better than all right." Clara leaned back against him. "I was just thinking about when I first came here. How scared I was. How certain I'd have to leave. And now? Now I'm certain I'll never leave." She turned in his arms to face him. "This is my home. You and Molly and this baby, you're my family. And I'm not the woman who came to disappear anymore." "No?" Ethan smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "No, I'm the woman who came home." In the meadow, Molly called out for them to come see the flowers she'd found, her voice bright with joy and innocence. Clara and Ethan walked out to join her together, their hands linked, their future spreading before them like the endless Wyoming sky. Clara Reed had come to this ranch believing she needed to vanish to survive. Instead, she'd discovered something far more powerful. She'd learned to stay, to fight, to love, to believe she deserved all the good things life could offer. She'd been hired as a cook, but she'd been chosen as a wife, a mother, a partner. And she would never run again. Because home